There we are. That's all I need to do to start. Gets complicated putting it up on the YouTube, but so far, so good. Good evening, Irving. I'm sure that you would reply to me if you were unmuted, which you are now. Good evening, Irving.
Good evening, Rabbi.
And as they say, B'te'avon.
Thank you.
Okay. So I believe we're coming up to time. I'll give it another couple of minutes. We are recording.
Now
And
it's time.
I'm going to share screen. I can do that too. And here we are. We have a screen. Shmuley says on my screen I should activate Windows. Do I need to activate Windows, do you think?
Well, we can see it at the moment.
Yeah. It gives me another 29 days. I need to activate Windows. I wonder why. Do you know why that would be?
Do you have
No.
Windows 10? Do you have still
Yes,
Windows?
I
So
have
you have
Windows
to.
10.
So you have to change to Windows 11.
Okay. See, I knew somebody would know. I can't be a dinosaur forever, Michael. That's what you're saying. I have to change.
And it's not. How you say? It's not maintained by
Microsoft.
Microsoft. Yeah.
Well, there we are.
So there's a risk. There's a risk of intrusion.
Okay, I am going to have to change. Okay, will do. Of course, Orthodox rabbis never change. However, we'll have to do that this time. Good evening, Ranon.
Good evening.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem.
Good. I assume that's Baruch Hashem well.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem well, yes, definitely.
Good, excellent, excellent. I always like to start with those who give me a purely theological statement. And I want to know how they are, not that the Lord is blessed. I'm sure he is, but then...
Well, Baruch Hashem, just I'm not a regular here because there's so many other things going on Wednesday evenings.
Absolutely.
Everybody thinks that Wednesday evening is the best time, but okay.
Fantastic. No, I'm not checking attendance. I'm just...
Well, I apologize for anyhow.
No worries. No worries. Jack.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Rabbi.
How are you?
So, Baruch Hashem, can't complain.
Good. I'm glad to see you. You were missed last time, but I'm happy to see that you are here now, and that's good. I think we can begin. So, we're going to the top of the document that you've all received, and we're going to talk more about smicha. The renewal project in the 16th century and what happened afterwards, including what happened in the 21st century. We'll round it all up to more or less the present day. So let's have a look. Line 5, further arguments by Rav Beirav and the Maharabach. Here are just two of the many arguments. I mean, as I said, I spared us a huge amount of halakhic material. Good evening, it's a huge amount of, you have to unmute it. Excellent. Huge amount of halakhic material, but I tried to cherry pick. And I've just thrown in two last items here. So let's see. Jean, you can give us the first one. Line 7, Mahari Beirav. So
Mahari Beirav
says as follows. Vegam
Harabat de lo isic alav kedarko nire שהוא סובר גם כן שיכולים לסמוך אם יסכימו חכמי ארץ ישראל.
So what does Mahari Beirav say? How does he prove that you can reintroduce smicha? Well, is that
he doesn't say no, donc that is yes.
Exactly. It's an argument from silence. Is an argument from silence a strong argument? Philosophically speaking, if you to argue from silence is not very strong, okay?
Qui ne dit mot consent.
Okay. What did the voice on my left say? That proves that the lav does produce a het. What I'd like to say is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Okay? The fact that the Raiva did not say, I disagree with the Rambam on this point, doesn't mean that the Rambam is right. Okay? But
Theoretically, but practically, if there was a shemetz shel doubt, he would have said.
well, perhaps he thought it was so absurd that he didn't even need to bother to make a Haggadah. But, I mean, what Murray Beirav does is he uses that to say, look, the Raivad had no problem, so therefore it must be right. And what did Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv say? He says, line 10, Omnam Haramban tafas b'mushlam, v'davar pashut she'en smicha klal ad yavo moret tzedek. It's an interesting phrase that we associate usually with the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the moret tzedek, okay, Mashiach comes, and the Ramban is very clear, that's when we'll reintroduce smicha. ואין לנו לעשות מעשה כנגד הוודאי של רמב"ן ז"ל, מפני הספק של הרמב"ם ז"ל. Now, as we remember, the Rambam, in his Mishneh Torah, at the end of his suggesting that we can introduce smicha, says, "Vadavar tzarich hechreya," meaning that we need to actually think more and try and resolve this in a more dispositive fashion. So the Ramban is very clear, no smicha until Mashiach. Rambam says yes, but I don't know that this is actually disposed of. So who are we to go? If we have a safek and a vadai, okay, then we'll go after the bari v'shema. How does the Gemara say bari v'shema? Bari adif. The definite, the certain, is superior to the doubtful. So there we are. And then he continues, Hagam shene'emar shehaya karov levadai be'inav kol shken. Good evening, Ian. Levadai be'inav kol shken b'maseh kazeh nora. Okay. Even though the Rambam in his Perush LaMishnah seems to be very sure that we can reintroduce smicha. Okay. But
I should read. כל שכן במעשה כזה נורא
כל
ונפלא.
שכן אבל, כל שכן במעשה כזה נורא ונפלא וחדש, שיש 1180 שנה שנפסק ממנו בעוונות. But we haven't done it for 1,800 years, going back to the 300s or so. ושמענו בוודאי שמאז ועדת היו חכמים רבים מופלאים בחוכמת התורה בארץ הקדושה. And there were many rabbis in Israel who were very suitable. להיות נשיאים ואבות בית דין, to be נשיא and av בית דין. בסנהדרין גדולה, in the great Sanhedrin of 71. לא שמענו בשום אחד מהם שעשה מעשה בדבר כזה. Nobody did it. So all this does not bode well. דבר השני, שחזר בו הרב ממנו בפסק. But in the Mishneh Torah, what did the Rambam say? והדבר צריך הכרח. So it's doubtful. מהטעם שכתב שם במשנה, כי שם הביא ראיה מפסוקי ישעיה עליו השלום. In the Mishneh Torah, he said, definitely, והשיבה שופטייך כבראשונה, ויועצייך כבתחילה. I'm going to restore your judges as they once were. And we're going to have the Sanhedrin. Rambam is very positive in his Perush LaMishnah. ובפסק, but in the Mishneh Torah, written afterwards, כתב הדבר צריך הכרח. Did he get cold feet? So that's the that's the counter argument of the Marabach. And as we said, nothing much happened. As a result of his giving smicha to his 4 students, the Ottoman authorities intervened. Somebody informed on Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. He had to flee Damascus, Egypt. In the meantime, became fairly wealthy. By the time he came back to Tzfat about 8 years later, the whole thing was already on a very low burner. So let's have a look at a couple later sources. Rabbi Karo's Magid, Mabit, and Radbaz. Now, you know about the Rabbi Karo's Magid. We talked about that, but I'll just refresh your memories. In the 1530s, in the Balkans, Rabbi Yosef Karo, according to his side of the story, is learning a Chavrut on Shavuot night with who?
Mit dem Malach.
Who? Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, a Chavruta with Shlomo Alkabetz in Adrianopoli. And in the middle of the night, by the way, nobody had a Tikkun El Shavuot then. It's all, as I said, we've become Kabbalists since coffee came on the scene and refreshments. But they were serious, and they were sitting and learning, and suddenly out of Rabbi Karo's throat, there's a strange voice. This is called the Magid, this heavenly voice, an angelic voice, that's suddenly conversing with these two great rabbis. We talked about this, and we read, in fact, the conversation when we were doing the world of the Zohar. But amongst the things that were said, beside the fact that they should continue learning Mishnah because of the link with Neshama and the capacity of the Mishnah to act as a ladder, taking you from this world to the next, and the fact that they should go to Eretz Israel, and the fact they should spend every Shavuot night in the future with a minyan of 10 learning, okay? The Magid says the following, Ki aromimcha liot sar v'nagid al kol golat Israel. This is before Karo got to Tzfat, as I said, according to the book Magid Mesharim. Okay, what happened in actual fact, we will never know. We only rely on the literature. So, the Magid says to Rabbi Karo, I'm going to make you a prince and a leader in the whole of the diaspora. Sheba Malchut Arabistan. Now, Arabistan is Arabistan. It's a term that we find used by Kabbalists to describe the eastern part of the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Kurdistan. They call it Arabistan, to do with Arab. Okay, I'm not going to go into this now. Could be something else, but we'll leave the etymology. The Yan ki masarta nafshira chazarat ateret hasmicha lioshna. The Magid is telling him before he even gets to Tzfat, before he links up with Rabbi Yaakov Berav, that he is going, this is a prophecy, he is going to restore smicha. And the Magid says this is a wonderful thing. Tizkeh liot musmach mikol chachmei Eretz Yisrael u'michachmei chutz la'aretz. You will be a musmach, okay, out of all the rabbis in the diaspora in Eretz Yisrael. V'al yadcha achzir smicha lioshna, and the old smicha will come back. Ve'azakecha ligmor chiburcha, and I'll also help you finish your great book, the Bet Yosef, this huge commentary on the Torah. Ubatar kach, and after that, listen to this. Titokad al kedushat shemi v'tistale ka'amra naki. What does that mean?
Titakat means to be almokat, to be burned.
Burned.
Al-Kedushat
Ishtukad. You will be burned at the stake, and you will leave this world. What's amra naki? What's amra?
A leaf, a sheep.
A lamb.
Lamb.
Very good. A lamb. A clean lamb. Now, this could take us hours because the idea of a clean lamb, well, it's found that the Ramchal develops it in Kabbalistic sources. Lahavdil elef haftalot, of course, Christianity calls Jesus the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, and you see it in medieval art, Agnus Dei, it's in medieval music, we've got compositions. The idea is from the Paschal Lamb, which is offered up. So Jesus becomes a Paschal Lamb because the whole thing happened on Pesach, the Seder night. It goes back to Jewish mysticism, okay? And I'm just going to leave you with this because it's very challenging and it happens to exist, okay? Because it implicates smicha as well. Now, is the Magid's historical appearance actually much later than it appears from the book called the Magid Mesharim? And is Rabbi Karo simply reading what happened to him and what he'd like to happen to him. Back into the Maggid's words when he begins his journey from the Balkans to Eretz Israel. All of this is up for grabs. Remember, we're talking about the cataclysm of the Gerush Farad. Think about people like Shlomo Molcho, okay, who were burned al Kiddush Hashem. This is the fate that many a Kabbalist would want, okay, to be burned at the stake, the final refining, burning out of all the sins, and the clean soul going up to heaven. And Debbie said, we won't even go there, okay? But this is a mystical idea, and I just want to bring it to your attention in case anybody wants to take it up. But I wanted it mainly for the smicha. Rabbi Karo felt very positive about the smicha. Now, his other musmach, his chavruta, the Mabit, Rabbi Moshe Ditrani, of course, is another Spaniard, descendant of Spaniards, okay? The whole thing scattered the cream, the creme de la creme of Spanish Jewry all over the East, okay? Now, Rabbi Moshe Ditrani, the son of Rabbi Yosef Ditrani, a great-grandson of the Rid, Rabbi Yishaya Ditrani, for whoever is familiar with the Ditranis, okay? Originally from Italy, of course. His father escaped Spain without needing to become a Marano and reached Salonika. And there, young Moshe studied. Eventually, he traveled to Tzfat. He became a Talmud Muvhak of Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. Okay, and Rabbi Yaakov Beirav appointed him a chaver in the Bet Din together with Rabbi Yosef Karo, and they received smicha, of course, from Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. The Mabit was a Rosh Yeshiva, and he was a very active correspondent on halachic matters with Rabbi B'Tzalel Ashkenazi in Egypt, with Rabbi Moshe Al-Ashkar, and with the Radbaz. He joined in the Ancona boycott, as we read, and he left over 800 tshuvot. And that's only a fraction of what he actually wrote. So he's one of the very famous Mishivim. He wrote a book called Kirat Sefer, which he analyzes the Rambam. Okay. By the way, Rabbi B'Tzalel Ashkenazi is the author of Itamu Kubetzet on the Talmud Bavli. So we're talking about, again, an outstanding scholar in Tzfat, and he's buried in the Chelkat Ha'ari. If you know the cemetery in Tzfat, there's a Chelkat Ha'ari where that whole glorious cohort is buried. So what does the Mabit say? He says, Katav harav zal nireni advarim shim hiskimu kol chachamim Eretz Yisrael not dayanim v'smoch otam. I'll just give you this in English. Mabit is totally for the idea of smicha. He says that this was done by Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, all kosher above board, and may the whole enterprise be a blessed enterprise because, and here we have this phrase that Karo used, Lachzir ha'atara lioshna, to bring the crown back to how it was. The crowning glory of Israel is restored when there is a Sanhedrin. Okay? So, two positive statements. But now let's have a look at the Radbaz. Anybody know Radbaz's full name?
David Ibn Zimra.
Rabbi David Ben Zimra, thank you, Jean. He was born in 1479, died in 1573. How old? Quite old, right? 94? Lived a long time. Not bad for somebody in the 15th and 16th centuries. Again, a family, a rabbinic family from Spain. Okay, and he studied under Rabbi Yosef Saragusi, and he left Spain for Fez. Some went to the Ottoman Empire, some crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and went straight to Fez. During the Wattasid rule of Morocco, things were fairly mild for Jews and Christians. So quite a few ended up in Fez. You may remember that the rabbi we cited a couple of weeks ago ended up in Fez. No, Rabbi Yaakov Berav himself said that he was a rabbi, the age of 18 and with barely a beard, 5,000 or 500 families. Okay, we're happy to have him as the rabbi in Fez. And Rabbi Gavison has a poem saying that how wonderful it was that Rabbi Yaakov Berav came to Fez, so he has brought the luminousness of the Torah to Fez. So those were the two directions in which it was fairly easy to escape. But if you left it too late, then you were in trouble. And we have all of the Marano stories, crypto Jews, and Maral Bach himself, as he says, as a young man, was forcibly baptized, and he had to basically live as a crypto Jew until he was able to get his family in Fez. So the Radbaz moved to Jerusalem in 1513, but then things were tough, always tough in Israel. So he went to Egypt. He went to Cairo. He went to Cairo, became an Av Bet Din, and after the Ottoman conquest, okay, in 1517, he was appointed the Nagid, the spiritual head of Egyptian Jewry, and he did extremely well. He was a very wealthy businessman. He traded in grains and in hides, and he became extremely rich. And for 40 years, he was like the Chacham Bashi, the chief rabbi in Egypt. Eventually, he returned to Jerusalem, but again left it shortly afterwards, went to Tzfat, died there in 1573. He's buried next to the Mabit. Go to the graveyard there, you'll see all of our rabbis, okay? In the Chelkat Kever Ha'ari. We talked about his tshuvot. Remember the religiosity of the Falashas. Remember the Falashim? The Radbaz wrote the famous tshuvah upon which Rav Ovadia Yosef relied to say that the Falashas are authentically Jewish and they are descendants of the tribe of Dan. He wrote over 10,000 tshuvot. 40 years is a long time. And he was recognized as an authority. We only have 2,000, but that's enough to read. Radbaz Hilchot Sanhedrin Perek Dad Halacha Yud Aleph. He also wrote a commentary on the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. So what does he say? Ranon, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
So would you like to read the Radbaz, please? Line 32. Nirin li advarim, and you can translate.
That's the Rambam saying the skimu kol chachmei Yisrael and so on.
Exactly.
הלשון זה סמכו חכמי צפת והגדול שבהם לסמוך סמוכים לדון דיני קנסות ולא עלה בידם. לפי שהחכם שהיה בירושלים לא הסכים עמהם.
So do you want to just sum up in English?
The language of the Rambam was the basis for the scholars in Sfat and the greatest among them to restore smicha,
which involved being able
that
to
they should be able to judge Dinei fines, but they didn't succeed.
Because who put the spoke in the wheel?
Chacham Shaya B'Yerushalayim.
Whose name is? Maral Bach, Rabbi Levi. Yeah, exactly. Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv. So personalities undid the enterprise, as is often the case. Okay. Now the Shalu et Pi.
The Shalu et Pi, so they asked me, Bodi b'Mitzrayim, I was still in Egypt. Ve'Pi chaverai v'lo yiskamnu. They asked me and my colleagues, and we did not agree.
So the Radbaz already is not agreeing with the
smicha.
V'ani
הרחתי באותה תשובה, לבטל דעתם. I at length explain why I against their opinion. ושלא דקדקו יפה בלשון רבנו, and that they did not pay sufficient attention to the language of the Rambam. Chada, for one thing, Shem Chashvu Shema Shekatav Rabbeinu B'Davar Tzich, what they thought, how they interpreted the language of the Rambam about Tzich Echreya, Kai Lemai de Salik Mine, that it refers to what is immediately before these words. V'Mayasham
Samuch mipi samuch.
Samuch Mipi
That is,
Samuch.
do you need 3 smuchin or is one enough? The Rambam says that if you have 1 samuch, then you can have 2 people who are not smuchin, and they can continue the chain of smicha, which was, of course, based on the story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Okay, so it may be, and this is what the Rabbi Yaakov ben Rav and others claim, that line of the Rambam, the last phrase, the important phrase, "V'adavar tzarich ekreya," doesn't refer to actually reintroducing smicha, but only refers to this possibility of 1 samuch getting 2 others who are not smuchin and being able to get this smicha going. But as far as reintroducing smicha, then the Rambam doesn't have any doubt at all. So I will take the theme up from here. Vaha, thank you, Ranon. Vaha vadai later. This is not feasible in my eyes. We don't need to resolve this. Sharihu katav lamala shu begimel. V'hu sheyeh echad mehem samuch kasher hochachnu mid Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. The Rambam anyhow wrote that this is an acceptable arrangement from Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Im ken al kol chacham ma shekatav v'adavar tzarich ekreya arei shakai v'kevan shu batzmo lo pshita lei ek naseh anachnu maaseh. Very similar to Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, the Rambam is doubtful about this. Who are we to resolve it out? The 2, Sharei hiksha ravim ken lama hayu mitztarin v'chule. Now, in his Perush la Mishnah, the Rambam expands and says, why were they so upset in the days of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava? They needed to risk his life to keep smicha going. Why did he need to sacrifice his life? Let the Romans come, let the Romans go, and when the Romans have gone, we can reintroduce smicha if the Rambam is correct. Ki ha'uvda d'ri ben Bava v'tiretz lafish Yisrael mefuzarim. The answer is, according to the Rambam, that we can't get everybody together. So Yehuda ben Bava was very nervous. We can't get everybody together, and it's impossible to do so. I need to keep smicha going, as it were, like a chain reaction, because once it stops, we'll never have sufficient unity and enough rabbis in one place to get this smicha going. Umabekach, Arobetz Israel, Krovim Zelazer, Yucholim Askim ala smicha lidei shluchim or lidei igrot. Radbaz says, but there are other ways of skinning a cat. You could send letters, you could send messengers, so you can't get them all together, but you can still communicate and get agreement. Elamai itachal lemeima. Another Radbaz says, and from the Rambam's Lashon in the Perush Mishnah, we learn that you need actually to get them all together. And you cannot do it in an indirect way. And this is what Marabach said. You're sending me your smicha after the fact, but you've made all the decisions. I wasn't involved in the discussion. And you can't do it that way. הלמדת, אפילו למה שהבינו בדברי רבנו היה צריך שכל כך בארץ ישראל יהיו במעמד אחד. So the Rambam says we need all the scholars of Israel to be in one place physically. ועוד שנראה שצריך המסמך ראוי להורות. Now the Radbaz goes on about the quality of the musmachim. בכל התורה כולה, to be a Sanhedrin member, you need to know the entire Torah. ורחוק בעיניי שיש בדור הזה מי שראוי להורות בכל התורה כולה. And we don't have men of that caliber. ועוד שהראיה שכתב רבנו בפירוש המשנה לדבר אינה ראויה לסמוך עליה. Now, Rambam's proof from Yeshayahu that before Mashiach comes, we have to have a Sanhedrin. I don't agree with that, says the Radbaz. שאם לא תאמר כן, אי אפשר שנמצא בדין הגדול לעולם, לפי שנצטרך שיהיה כל אחד מהם סמוך על כל פנים, והקדוש ברוך הוא ייעד שישובו, כמו שנאמר, והשיבה שופטי כבראשונה, וצריך כבתחילה וכו'. ומי ייתן ועדה? Now says the Radbaz, hold on. שהרי אליהו, line 4, בא לפני המשיח. אליהו הנביא comes before Mashiach. Did Eliyahu Hanavi have smicha? The answer is yes. The Rambam, and Chazal explain that he was a samuch, and he was able to be masmich acherim lifnei bo HaMashiach. The Rambam himself, when he traces the tradition from Moshe to Yeshua to this Kenim, goes with the prophets, judges, and the prophets, and he includes Eliyahu Hanavi. So there we are. The two, and furthermore, Dibnei Ruven atidim lavo v'lasot milchamot lifnei bo melech HaMashiach. The Reubenites are going to start up all sorts of wars before Mashiach comes. Oman leimalan shelo yeh bahen samuch mipi samuch v'hu yismoch acherim. Perhaps they will have a genuine musmach. Now, what happened to Bnei Reuven? They were exiled by which king? Sancheriv. Okay, the 10 lost tribes. Now, why Reuven? All this, of course, is all very fascinating and interesting, but we have a tradition that Reuven, of course, got a raw deal. He was cut out of the leadership of the nation of Israel. He wasn't part of Yosef, wasn't part of Yehuda, but it says, Reuven yeter se'et v'yeter az. You have extra power and might. When? Before the Mashiach. Bnei Reuven are going to start wars all over, and they're going to overcome the nasty Gentiles. Now, which episode in Jewish history is a very good example of the fact that this tradition about Bnei Reuven, which is a Kabbalistic tradition in the main, okay, was a powerful idea. I'll give you a clue. We're talking about a person. Which figure in Jewish history was identified as a Reubenite and did a lot of fascinating things, convinced Pope Clement that he was going to organize an army to cross the Sambation of
Reubeni.
David HaRouveni. Remember? If you don't, look him up in Wikipedia or Chat GTP, or Gemini will be even quicker. David HaRouveni. Why is he called David HaRouveni? Because of this tradition. Bnei Reuven are going to start up all these wars. I'm going to leave all the other sources and the Midrash and the Kabbalah, but definitely. And that's where Reuven gets to be top cat. Yeter se'et, the yeter az. Then, of course, the problem is because you were naughty, you will not be able to get your se'et and your az until just before the Messianic period. David HaRouveni knows exactly what he's doing. Playing on this tradition, he was, by the way, a short, swarthy, dark guy, dressed unusually, and nobody knew quite how to swallow him in Europe when he appeared on the scene. And he was able to convince the Pope, and he went to the emperor and said, I'm going to raise an army and we'll attack the infidels. And of course, eventually was clapped in jail. And like all of these people, look it up. Voice on my left, please. Give us the dates of David HaRouveni. And so the whole thing, of course, fizzled out. But that's why he was David HaRouveni. There's also another tradition that the Rabbaz cites. The two she'amru b'midrashot she'Mashiach yitgaleh b'Galil. Now, this is important for the future. The Mashiach is going to begin in the Galil. Why? Because the Galil belongs to Bnei Yosef. And there are two Mashiachim, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. So the Galil is where he's going to be revealed. And this, of course, will be in the territory of Manasseh and Ephraim. And this will be before the Davidic line steps in. What happens to Mashiach ben Yosef? He's killed in a war. So before you have your very successful Yehuda-led Messianic period, Michael, you've got a Joseph-led or descendant of Joseph, and he dies, but he does a lot of fighting, and this Mashiach will come, v'yachzor v'yitkaseh, and then he will be covered. He'll disappear. Apparently he's dead, but he may come back. Oman leimalan shelo yismoch bedin bezman sheyitgaleh bitchila. But when Mashiach ben Yosef first enters on the scene, he can produce smicha. So the Rabaz marshals the sources we've learnt, the doubt, what did the Rambam mean? Then he says that the Rambam's emphasis on the fact that we need a Sanhedrin before Mashiach comes, while in the period of Mashiach, we have agencies that could bring about a smicha. B'nai Reuven. Now, they've spent all these years since Sanherib, which is like 780, BCE, on the other side of the Sambatyon River, in this mystical area, Prester John and all that, where the 10 lost tribes are. So they could have original Musmachim without any problem. So they could solve the problem. Or, if it's not B'nai Reuven, it is Eliyahu Hanavi. And if it's not Eliyahu Hanavi, it's Mashiach ben Yosef. We have a lot of options for a genuine Musmach to appear before Mashiach. So we don't need to do it ourselves. ואפשר שמתוך קושות אלו וזולתם, לא סמך על מה שכתב בפירוש המשנה. Now, the Rambam, interestingly enough, says, we have to account for the fact that in the Perush Mishnah, the Rambam is very gung-ho on introducing smicha, very positive. But in the Mishneh Torah, he seems to be more hesitant. This is why. He's learnt. He understands that there may be many more options, okay? So, that basically is all I want to do in relation to the 16th century. And now we're going to move on. And Jack, can I ask you to read, please, modern attempts? Let's see what in more modern times, okay?
Modern attempts to establish a Sanhedrin or a similar body. In 1897, Rav Kook wrote about the establishment of a Sanhedrin at such a time that there was a Jewish sovereignty in Eretz Israel.
What important event happened in 1897?
Le Congrès d'Orbach.
Herzl's Congress.
Herzl's Congress, the first Zionist Congress. Rav Kook is responding when he's in Lithuania, okay? Because he only arrived in Eretz Israel, or southern Syria as it was, in 1906. But he responded to that in an interesting essay. So let's see what he wrote. Jacques, please, could you continue?
However, he envisaged it not as a body consisting of Musmachim qualified to impose fines and deals with capital cases and corporal punishment,
including Malchus, as we learned, but
as a highly qualified central halachic body aiming to attain a significant modicum of religious uniformity for the entire Jewish people.
Unity! Okay, this is what the modern attempts to smicha are all about. We feel all the time, we have so many groups, so many different ways of keeping Jewish law, so many hashkafot, so many things that perhaps are outdated, old-fashioned, so many things that we want rabbis to change. But rabbis won't change because they'll say, mi ani, how can I do it? Okay, we have to be very careful. We don't have the authority. Let's recreate authority. So what comes first? The change or the institution? Now, if you are thinking halakhically or legally, institutional change is much easier than suddenly breaking all familiar concepts and saying we're going to go out on a different limb. If we had so many rabbis from all the streams of, say, orthodoxy, just orthodoxy, agreeing on certain things, wouldn't that make life easier? Some people want to abolish the second day of Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz. Some people want to make Gittin, the whole process of divorce, much less nasty when it comes to horrible husbands. All these things, could they not be resolved by a Sanhedrin? So whenever we want to read, the introduction of the Sanhedrin has different motivations through history. Motivation very clearly in 1538 was so that the cream of Spanish Jewry that managed to escape the terrors of the exile and Inquisition could cleanse their souls and receive Malkot, but it was more than that. They wanted to be able to produce some sort of uniformity, because again, when the Spaniards came to the communities in Italy and in Greece and in Morocco, they found different customs, different way of doing things, and they thought that they were right. There was a lot of conflict over that. So wouldn't it be wonderful to have a unifying institution? So Rav Kook says, let's aim for that. All right. Now, Jack, would you please finish off this section? It would not, therefore.
It would not, therefore, impinge upon the dispute between Rav Berav and the Mahar Bach.
So we can put that to a side. We don't need to get involved and say who was right, because we're looking at something much less potent. He also made it clear.
He also made it clear that the body in question would only operate at the level of rabbinic law, which is generally interpreted in a lenient manner.
So this is Rav Kook. If you look at the bottom line, 34, his essay Al Hatzionut, written when he was in Lithuania because of the First Zionist Congress in Basel, and he wrote a lot, but this is something that he thought would be a wonderful thing to be able to achieve in Eretz Israel. Because you have aspects of smicha which definitely speak to Eretz Israel. So if we're going to be true Zionists and go and live in Eretz Israel, we could reintroduce a Sanhedrin, but not the full-blown Sanhedrin as Rabbi Yaakov Beirav wanted to do, but just to have a body that could unify, okay? So he talks about this, and I'm going to let you read it in your spare time, but the important line is, okay, that we would be able to deal with issues of midrabanan only, okay? אם יהיה לנו הדין מסופק, נוכל לסמוך שסנהדרין ידון על כל פנים לענייני מילי דרבנן, line 30. We have a lot of doubts, okay? A lot of issues are up for grabs. There are controversies at the rabbinical level, not at the Torah level. Most of our halakha is midrabanan. So at least the Sanhedrin could help us with some of those burning issues, okay? ועוד עד כאן לא למדנו מהמחלוקת שלהם, כי אם נדון דיני קנסות ונפשות. We're going to leave the whole issue of whether they can do דיני קנסות, נפשות, including מלכות. אבל על חובת המצווה לשמוע לכל דבר שיגידו לך מן המקום ההוא, which is of course a paraphrase of the verse in דברים about the need to obey the rabbis, לא מצינו כלל שיהיה תלוי בסמיכה. You don't actually need real smicha for that. This is what Rav Kook is saying. We're not going to reintroduce smicha. We don't need to get into what the Rambam meant. We don't need to get in the machloket between Mari Beirav and the Marabach. We want a body of the best sages, rabbis that we have, to sit together in the land of Israel, where is interesting. And then we can start making Orthodox life higher quality. And we can have some of that blessed unity that we all crave. And he uses phrases from the Beit Din HaGadol in Deuteronomy chapter 17. And Elav Nishma, and Lo Yasur, Lo Yemina, Lo Smola, all of this respect and dignity to a body that comprises the best of Jewish scholarship across the board. Let's see if we can get that. And this is really what they try to do. But rabbis, of course, never agree. Thank you, Jack. Let's have someone else, please, to read the next section. So, David Parks, I can see you. Would you like to
I prefer not to read in Ivrit, but if it's not
no,
very good.
No.
Oh, yeah, it's further
in
down.
English.
Okay.
Line 36,
Right.
in 1901.
No, 30, yeah. Okay, in 1901, Rabbi Aaron Mendel HaKohen, rabbi of the Ashkenazi community in Cairo, proposed re-establishing the full-blown Sanhedrin in the light of the nation's return to its land and its renewal.
1901, okay, we're starting to get back. He was an Ashkenazi scholar from Lithuania, of course, ended up in Egypt, head of the Ashkenazi community in Cairo, and he wrote a book called Smichat Chachamim. He was entranced by this idea of Smichat Chachamim, as many rabbis were, okay? But especially after the Zionist movement and the return and the prospect possibly of a Jewish state, okay? So let's see. He wrote a volume?
He wrote a volume entitled Smichat Chachamim in which he made a practical suggestion to begin by ordaining 3 outstanding rabbis, one Lithuanian, one Sephardi, and one Hasidic.
A Litvak,
They-
a Chassid, and a Sephardi. It's a bit like a joke, okay? There were one day
They
there was
walk
a
to the
Litvak,
bar.
a Chassid, and a Sephardi, and they were all okay. But
Yeah.
it's a very scholarly work,
Right.
and he goes into what we've discussed, but a lot more. But he says, look, we look around the Orthodox world, only the Orthodox world, of course, and we've got the Litvaks, the Hasidim, the Sephardim. Let's see if we can get the best representative of each of these groups, and they in turn would continue, David. They in turn would ordain.
They would in turn ordain many others, and he garnered a not inconsiderable support. 5,000 rabbis signed onto the project for his initiative.
Reb Aaron Mendel was very active. He wrote letters all the time, all over the Jewish world, to Orthodox rabbis only. He got 5,000 replies. Now, not all of them were enthusiastic, but definitely a lot of very Orthodox rabbis said, in general, a good idea. All right?
Right.
There were, however,
influential opponents, including Reb Chaim Berlin, son of the Netziv, and the rabbis of Jerusalem.
the rabbis of Jerusalem were always the fly in the ointment, okay? Everything has to go through the Jerusalem rabbis. To this day, the Badats in Yerushalayim, it's a tough nut to crack. It is noteworthy.
It's noteworthy they did receive support of the Ridaz.
Now, Ridbaz is not Radbaz, okay? Be very careful. Rabbi Yaakov David Vilovsky, 1845 till 1913, was not the Radbaz, who was 15th century. Now, the Ridbaz was another Litvak. He was Rabbi of Slutsk, a famous town for its Torah scholars, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva in Tzfat.
And he made a commentator of the Yerushalmi.
He did indeed. And he also opposed Rav Kook in relation to the Heter Mechira. But actually, Rav Kook and the Ridbaz got on well. They just argued over Rav Kook's permission to sell the land of Israel during the Shemitah year, so that everybody would be able to work the land, because the economy of the Jews living in Palestine was dependent upon citrus. If you remember, oranges, lemons, I don't know, whatever it was from the land of Israel. Israel was the citrus king, and it needed to work the land. Anyhow, that's a whole different story. When we get to Rav Kook, it might be something that we might want to do. But at the age of 23, Vilovsky was a darshan in Vilna. And, to get to be an orator in Vilna, it wasn't sort of easy. You had to be very good. And he also...
But Ridbaz was for the project or against?
He was against Heter Mechira. Against.
No, but for the project, he was for.
He was. Yes.
Sure.
In other words, there's no. You can't expect consistency. We'll see that. Rabbinic positions change. There's no consistent line. They'll do what they think is right in the particular circumstance. So he supported this smicha, and he writes about it in his Perush on the Patah Shulchan of Rabbi Israel of Shklov. By the way, he had an interesting North American episode. They brought him over to Chicago, and they wanted him to become chief rabbi of Chicago. Now, you know what happens in America when you want to make somebody chief rabbi? He discovers how corrupt the kosher world is, and how dangerous and difficult it is for an Orthodox rabbi to actually run kashrut properly. So he spent some time. He said, I see what's going here. He says, the Sultan is winning every day. I'm not going to become chief rabbi of Chicago. And he went back to Eretz Yisrael. And just as a curiosity, his daughter was the mother-in-law of Rabbi Yechezkel Abramsky, the Chazon Yechezkel, who became the Av Beit Din in London. And therefore, Abramsky had 2 sons, one called Yaakov David, who went to Palestine and became a well-known Israeli author, writer, and a polemicist. He is called after
Ridbaz?
After the Ridbaz, yes, Yaakov David. What was Abramsky's other son who stayed in England. His name was?
An historian.
No, the
Shimon.
Wow, Jean. How do you know what happened in England? What a érudit. Okay, global. So, okay, thanks. Shimon, does
It was
anybody?
I just want to throw there that
Yeah.
Reed Baz also coined the phrase that America is a tray for Medina.
Exactly. As I said,
And
I
it's also, it's my understanding that he was appointed chief rabbi of Chicago.
Yeah.
And destroyed the kashrus arrangements that had been there until then, and did not succeed in making any new arrangements. And that's what caused the balagan.
Okay, you've put it more precisely. I was just giving it just skimming. But
I'm from Chicago. So.
He did come over to Chicago. He writes that he sees the Satan is at work, okay, and is winning. He did coin the phrase "Treffen Medina," okay, and that describes the state American kashrut. Ranon, I believe, was the Wild West in those days, and it was in the West because that's where they slaughtered the meat, right? And they put them on trains to go eat. And then there's the whole question of, do you have to wash the meat every 3 days unless it's kept wet? Then you can't perhaps salt and kosher it. A lot of issues, but the corruption was rife.
Yeah.
They tried to make the Malbim chief rabbi of New York. I mean, again, this was a real hornet's nest. So he did expose the kashrut, but then the people who are making money simply refused to accept his reforms. And he said, okay, I'm packing up and going back to Israel. Thank you. And Shimon, the historian, of course, stayed in England. And it's the Litvak pronunciation. It's not Shimon, not Simon. He became Shimen with an E-N at the end, okay? Shimon Abramsky. All right, so Rav Kook was less than enthusiastic.
Rav Kook was less than enthusiastic about the idea and advised Rav HaKohen that the time for this had not yet come and that such initiatives would meet with strong opposition. Also, because in our generation there are barely any rabbis of stature worthy of receiving authentic smicha and sitting on the Sanhedrin.
Okay. Reb Mendel wanted to have authentic smicha. Not going to happen. Let's see. Yitz, you're next on my list. Would you please read Rabbi Tzvi Makovsky?
Rabbi Tzvi Makovsky, a member of the Tel Aviv rabbinate, wrote a comprehensive study on the topic, V'ashiva Shoftayich.
That's the pasuk that the Rambam cites, okay? Chapter 1. Published
in 1938, exactly 400 years since the failed attempt in Tzfat.
1538? 1938.
He too sent letters to leading rabbinic figures in his day with the goal of restoring the Sanhedrin in pre-state Palestine. Many of the responses he received were published in his work, and his efforts generated a flurry of scholarship on the topic.
We're always very prolific authors of halakhic essays, but we don't get much done.
However, nothing practical emerged from his research, and very soon afterwards, the entire Jewish world was preoccupied with other issues.
1938. In 1948, Marcel, are you good?
In 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel, the idea of restoring smicha and re-establishing a new Sanhedrin became popular in the religious Zionist community. Rav Yehuda Leib Maimon, Israel's first minister of religious affairs, promoted the idea in a series of articles in Sinai and Hotzafer. These were later gathered together in a monograph entitled Hidush HaSanhedrin B'Medinat
HaMechudeshet. In our renewed country. Okay, we're going to have the new Sanhedrin. Okay, Rabbi Maimon, whose name was Fishman. Whose name was Fishman.
I have this little book.
You have a little book.
This little book.
Let's have a look and see what you're holding up.
No. Donc, the Chidush HaSanhedrin, I have this book.
Right. You have that
This
book.
is the way why I know all the details, because he
Of the
quotes much.
Sanhedrin.
Yes.
Okay, so Fishman was actually very, very interesting. Family name was Maimon, but they needed to take Fishman because of pursued by the police. So Jews often change their surnames for all sorts of practical reasons. He was actually born in Moldova, 1875. He grew up in the Malbim's home. Okay, he grew up there was a Ben Bayit of the Malbim. His father was very close to the Malbim and died when little Yehuda Leib was only 4. So the Malbim took him into his home, and basically he was looked after by the Malbim. So he learned a lot. He arrived in Vilna as a young man, and he was immediately given smicha by the great Gedolim, including the Aruch HaShulchan and the Steichemed, Chaim Chizkiah Medini. He founded the Mizrahi in 1913, and he went on Aliyah, and he founded Mossad Rav Kook. Ben Gurion thought very highly of him. He wanted to get Elohei Israel into the Declaration of Independence, but the Chilonim refused. So we have Tzur Israel, not Elohei Israel, in the Declaration of Independence. He signed on the Declaration of Independence, and when the Declaration was declared, he got up and said, Shechiyanu v'kimanu. He made the full bracha, and everybody in the convening group answered Amen. But he wrote a lot, and one of his famous volumes, beside the volume on Smicha, is something called Sarei HaMeah, which is stories and descriptions of the important Ashkenazi rabbis from the 16th century onwards. But anyhow, he was very keen on the Sanhedrin. But what happened? Rabbi Maimon proposed, let's see. Thank you, Marcel. Michael Rosenfeld, would you like to read, please? From line 17, Rabbi Maimon proposed.
Rabbi Maimon proposed using the Israeli rabbinate as a nucleus for the new Sanhedrin and convened a conference in Tiberias in order to launch the project. A small number of religious Zionists and RCA rabbis attended, but the project was strongly opposed by leading halachic authorities, including Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, and the Chazon Ish,
who compared it
to Napoleon's Sanhedrin.
Now, we all know about Napoleon's Sanhedrin, or if not, you can look it up. Lasted exactly a month and a half. The idea was to get the Jews to agree to what Napoleon wanted them to agree. In other words, I'm going to put this very succinctly because we don't have much time ever. But the attitude of that whole emancipation process in Europe was you can be a Jew as a private citizen, but not a Jew as a nation. As long as you are quiet, you practice your religion at home and in your shul, that's fine. But we want you to be a good Frenchman, German, Dutchman, Belgian, whatever it was, okay? Not a separate nation. Israeli
Ashkenazi rabbi at the time, Rav Dr. Yitzchak Halevi Herzog, was also reluctant to throw his weight behind the project, and like Rav Berav's scheme so many years before, the idea eventually died a natural death.
That's what seems to happen to renewal of smicha projects. I'm going to read you a little Gemara from Masechet Rosh Hashanah. After the destruction of Jerusalem, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai took the Sanhedrin to Yavne. But before that, the Sanhedrin had left its place in Lishkat Hagazit, which is a courtyard in the temple, because it didn't want to be responsible for capital cases, didn't want to be a Sanhedrin anymore. Roman persecution, divisions amongst the people in Israel. So already fairly early, full-blown smicha didn't exist, but you did have a body of sages to look after rabbinic halacha. Went from Nishkat Hagazit to Chanut. Chanut is either a storehouse at the edge of the temple or a place. Umichanut Yerushalayim, and then into the city of Jerusalem. Yerushalayim leYavne, and then it went from Jerusalem to Yavne. Miyavne leUsha, Usha, which is already in the Galil, back to Yavne, depending upon where the Nasi at the time lived. Umiyavne leUsha, but then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel took it back to Usha. Umeusha leShfaram, up north in the Galil. Umishfaram lebet Sha'arim, where Rabbi Yehuda Nasi lived and wrote and redacted the Mishnah. Umibet Sha'arim Nitzipori, associated again with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Mitzipori Tiberia to Tiberias. The Tiberia Amuka Mikolan, and the pits was Tiberias. In other words, it was the lowest ebb in the authority and prestige of the Sanhedrin. Shneimar v'shafalt me'eretz tidabri or me'afar tashuach imratesh. In other words, we're already we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and where did Rabbi Yochanan, the famous Yerushalmi Amora, live? Tiberia, or Misham Atidin Nigael. But out of that very bottom pit is the redemption going to come. Rabbi Yochanan says it is from Tiberia that we are going to get the process of redemption. That's where the messianic process begins. Shenemar hitnari me'afar kubi means we rise up from the afar of Tiberia. Okay, so that's an interesting Gemara. And now we're just going to finish this off, and then I want to talk a little when I do share screen. Shmuley, would you give us from line 32, please?
In 2004, a group of Israeli rabbis met secretly in Jerusalem to renew Smicha and restore the Sanhedrin. The initial Smicha was awarded to Moshe Halberstam, a leading Hasidic posek and a dayan on the Balatz. He in turn conferred Smicha on a number of rabbis, including Rav Dov Lavanoni and Rav Tzvi Idan. The first official...
Dov Lavanoni was an aged and very respected Chabad rabbi, and Tzvi Idan was an important Talmid Chacham. The first official gathering
of the 71 Sanhedrin members was in Tiberia in Tishrei 2004. That city was chosen in light of the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Rav Israel Ariel and Rav Yoel Schwartz, founder of the Haredi Nachal, were prominent members of the Sanhedrin. Professor Hillel Weiss was appointed spokesman, and Rav Adin Steinsaltz was eventually appointed president and Nasi. Although the group was active for a few years, it too eventually faded out of public view, and Rav Steinsaltz left.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share and going to say a few words about this more modern Sanhedrin. This is 21st century stuff. So what happened? A secret gathering, rabbis supporting the idea, get together, and the 71 rabbis who were all given title Rav by Rabbi Chaim Halberstam, who really was a very well-respected, very knowledgeable, and very impressive Hasidic type posek, but very learned on the Badatz of Yerushalayim, and they get their first meeting going in Tiberia. But what sort of thing did this Sanhedrin do, and what makes it, what are some of the cherry pickings? Well, they generally tended to be very right-wing, okay? And during the time that it was some kind of Sanhedrin that actually issued rulings, it was concerned with a lot of political issues. For example, it issued a ruling against the expulsion of Israelis from Yamit, the Sanhedrin, okay? It also, Rav Yisrael Ariel, his brother Rabbi Yaakov Ariel's Rabbi Ramat Gan, he is very right-wing, and he founded Machon HaMikdash. He also wrote a book about Gevulot Eretz Israel, and in his view, Eretz Israel stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates. In other words, we should be conquering Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, and not stopping until we get to the Euphrates. So you can imagine he was also hauled up, by the police on a number of occasions, from planning to chef the Korban Pesach on Har HaBayit to praying. I mean, all of this stuff. and the whole Sanhedrin started to take on this kind of very right-wing hue. Then and Hillel Weiss, by the way, who's professor of Jewish literature, a real pioneer in the Shmuel Yosef Agnon, okay? He set up basically the cathedra for the teaching of Agnon from a literary perspective, radical right-wing, founder of the Yishuv Elkanah. As far as he's concerned, what we need in Israel is a Jewish theocracy ruled by the Sanhedrin. We don't want a parliament, we don't want a Knesset, nothing like that. But then they got Rav Steinsaltz involved. Rav Steinsaltz didn't like this whole right-wing political cast. They were going to bring it back to what a Sanhedrin would be as a light to the nations. The curious thing that I can tell you is that he issued a ruling in the name of the Sanhedrin that the Chinese government should stop persecuting the Falun Gong. Do you remember the Falun Gong? A group of people in China.
They practiced Tai Chi. Was it?
Tai Chi, a type of religious martial arts, and they were not. The Communist Party in China, of course, is very sensitive, and the Chinese persecuted them because they weren't being uniform. So Rav Steinsaltz got the Sanhedrin to issue a ruling that the Chinese government is in breach of a ruling of the Supreme Jewish Court. Now, when the Chinese got hold of this, they didn't know what to do with this. They didn't know what the Sanhedrin was. They thought this was Israeli Supreme Court criticizing the Chinese, and you know the Chinese government, does not tolerate criticism. So Ora Namir was the Israeli ambassador to China at the time. She was chastised by the Chinese for the Israeli Supreme Court criticized the Chinese government, and she wrote back. I mean, she said, tell the Sanhedrin to back off, and the Sanhedrin said, we're not backing off. So she explained to the Chinese what the Sanhedrin was. But they did a couple of odd things. They definitely tried to protect orange demonstrators during their demonstrations against the evacuation from Yamit, and there was a lot of conflict with the police and with the authorities at the time. So it was going in this odd, very political direction. So it basically has fizzled out. We don't talk about the Sanhedrin anymore. Steinsaltz left, I think, partly in disgust at what was happening. I'm just going to say my last word about this pair. Rav Yisrael Ariel was the Nasi during the heyday of the Sanhedrin for about 2 years, and Rabbi Yoel Schwartz was the Av Bet Din. Does that name ring a bell, Rabbi Yoel Schwartz? Okay.
Rabbi?
Well,
there is a Rabbi Yonah Schwartz.
No, Yoel.
Yoel means he's Satmar.
No, he wasn't. It wasn't Satmar at all. As we said, he founded the Nachal Haredi. But Yoel Schwartz was very interesting. Okay, very interesting indeed. He went to the classical yeshivot, Haredi yeshivot, Kol Torah, Polovitch, and Mir. By the way, for a year he had a chavruta with Reb Chaim Shmulevich, okay, which is quite something. He got smicha from him, and he was very close to the late Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and to Reb Yosef Shalom Eliashiv. He was very interested in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, and he wrote a book called Or La'amim, in which he said we've got to make an effort to get all the Gentiles in the world to keep the 7 Mitzvot B'nai Noach. No. And he actually engaged in outreach, and there are very frum, as they say, yeshiva light, who will travel to North America especially to give guidance to these communities in Texas, okay, and in other places of that ilk as to how to live a Noachide life. He wanted to use the Sanhedrin to pass important rulings for the entire non-Jewish world about how to live as a Noachide. As I said, he also founded the Nachal Haredi, but he withdrew in 2013 because of the Chok HaGius. Now, his career in yeshiva life was he was a Rosh Yeshiva and Mashgiach in Itri, I assume that the Americans have heard of Itri. Okay, it was a quite well-respected learning institution. The Rosh Yeshiva may have been somewhat dubious, if I can say that about Rabbi Elephant. Okay, but I leave you to speak to Shmuley. Okay, if you want anybody to spill the beans on Rabbi Elephant. He was also in Nitivot. He ended up as Rosh Yeshiva of Devar Yerushalayim. But it's actually thanks to him that we can focus on worms, tolaim in vegetables. He was the first important rabbi in Israel to draw our attention to the proliferation of forbidden creepy crawlies in vegetables, and he actually opened up a shop in Geula, okay, which I think he called Skulat Yoel, in which he actually sold for the first time absolutely guaranteed worm-free vegetables. Okay, and this started a whole trend, as we know now. Whether we can have a look at the Tolaim at another time. Whether we can see them or not, of course, is an interesting halakhic question. But what we've done is we've completed our study. Historically speaking, we're still in the 16th century of Smicha in Sfat. And I've just added a little bit of the modern stuff and what has happened since. The idea of unifying in some way orthodoxy, just orthodoxy, okay, is still a powerful idea. And we are often very sad at the fact that we cannot seem to get certain things done which would make the quality of religious life in Orthodox circles better, okay? But it's proved elusive. Personalities are involved. And there we are. I can only say this is the state of the Jewish people. I'm not going to analyze it any further than that. But we are going to move on, I think, to back to Ashkenaz. We're going to have a look at a fascinating pair of Responsum writers. Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, known as the Chacham Tzvi, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden, his son. Okay, and we're going to have a look at some fascinating questions, including the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, the case of the heartless chicken, and artificial intelligence. All of that to start in Yetz Hashem next week. V'shar tova umutzlach. That's it in all this evening, folks. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Good evening.
Good evening.